The chamber of the Galactic Senate had witnessed countless debates over its 3,000-year history, but none quite like this. Unity Station, a massive construct orbiting the neutral world of Sanctuary Prime, housed representatives from 47 species, each evolved under different stars, breathing different atmospheres, viewing reality through sensory organs humanity had never dreamed of. Yet despite their differences, they had gathered here with one purpose: to decide the fate of an entire species. Ambassador Sarah Chen sat in Earth's designated seat, her hands folded carefully on the smooth surface before her. She had been humanity's voice to the galaxy for 6 years now, and in that time she had navigated trade disputes, territorial disagreements, and cultural misunderstandings. But this was different. This was extinction dressed up in bureaucratic language. The Kelhari stood accused. Their representative, Elder Thavrin, stood in the center of the circular chamber, his crystalline skin reflecting the harsh lights in patterns that betrayed his anxiety. The Kelhari were a bipedal species, roughly humanoid in shape, but their bodies were partially composed of a silicon-based compound that gave them an almost translucent appearance. They were beautiful in their way and entirely unprepared for the brutality of galactic politics. High Ambassador Zethvar of the Zarmethian Collective was speaking, his voice amplified through translation matrices so every species could understand. The Zarmethians were reptilian, massive creatures that towered over most other species, with scales that shifted between deep purple and black depending on their mood. Right now, Zethvar's scales were blood red, signaling what the Zarmethians considered righteous anger. "The evidence is irrefutable," Zethvar declared, his clawed hand gesturing toward a holographic display. Intercepted communications between Kelhari scientists discussing weapons development, testimony from reliable sources within their colonies, suspicious technological advancements that can only have come from stolen military research. The Kelhari are planning coordinated terrorist attacks across multiple systems. They represent a clear and present danger to galactic security. Sarah had reviewed the evidence 3 times. She knew what others would see: damning communications, frightening testimony concerning technological progress. But she also saw what they chose to ignore. The communications were taken out of context, discussing theoretical physics rather than weapons. The testimony came from sources with financial connections to Zarmethian corporations. The technological advancements were in agriculture and medicine, not warfare. But most importantly, she saw the convenient truth behind it all. The Kelhari homeworld and their 3 colonies were rich in zaranite, a rare crystalline fuel source that powered faster-than-light travel more efficiently than any known alternative. The Zarmethian Collective's own zaranite mines were running dry. They needed the Kelhari worlds, and galactic law prevented simple conquest, unless the Kelhari were classified as an existential threat. Sarah stood, her movement triggering her own translation matrix. "Honorable members of the Senate," she began, her voice calm despite the anger burning in her chest. "I must object to these proceedings. The evidence presented is circumstantial at best, fabricated at worst. The communications in question are scientific discussions, not terrorist planning. The testimony comes from sources with clear conflicts of interest, and the technological developments cited are peaceful in nature." She paused, making eye contact with as many representatives as her human eyes could manage. The Kelhari are a young species, only 2 centuries into interstellar civilization. They have no history of aggression, no military capability beyond basic system defense. Their culture values art, philosophy, and scientific inquiry. Does this sound like a species planning galactic terrorism? Zethvar's scales darkened further. "The youngest predators are often the most dangerous, Ambassador Chen. Would you have us wait until they strike? Would you risk billions of innocent lives on your naive assessment of their character?" "I would risk an independent investigation," Sarah countered. "This Senate was founded on principles of justice and evidence-based decision-making. Collective Security Protocol Omega is meant for genuine existential threats, not convenient political maneuvering. I formally request a 6-month investigation period before any vote is taken." The chamber erupted in translated voices. Some species supported Earth's position, but they were few. The Zarmethian collective had spent years building alliances, offering favorable trade deals, positioning themselves as guardians of galactic security. They had votes to spare. The vote was called. Sarah watched the display as species after species voted in favor of Protocol Omega. The Vaxians, the Krell, the Torthians, species humanity had considered friends. Each vote was a dagger, each approval a betrayal of everything the Senate claimed to stand for. When the final tally appeared, the result was clear: 46 species in favor of Kalahari extermination, 1 against. Elder Thavrin's crystalline form seemed to dim, the light within him fading like a dying star. His people, 50 million souls across 4 worlds, had been condemned to death by committee. They had 30 days to surrender their worlds for sterilization, a clinical term for genocide. Sarah stood once more, her heart pounding but her voice steady. She had one card left to play, one statement that would change everything. Let the record show that Earth does not recognize this vote as legitimate. We consider it a violation of basic sentient rights and a mockery of justice. Therefore, Earth hereby grants asylum to any Kalahari citizen who can reach our borders. We will not surrender them to this illegal sentence. We will protect them as if they were our own people. The chamber fell silent. Then slowly laughter began to build. The Zarmethians laughed first, soon joined by others. Humanity protecting another species. Humanity with their tiny fleet and single homeworld standing against 46 galactic powers. It was absurd, it was suicide. It was, the galaxy decided, the desperate bravado of a species that didn't understand the stakes. Sarah sat down, her expression unchanged. Let them laugh. They would understand soon enough. The exodus began within hours of the vote. On the Kalahari homeworld of Kethsara, families made impossible choices. What do you take when fleeing your entire civilization? What do you leave behind when you know you'll never return? Elder Thavrin watched from the council chambers as ancient transport ships, vessels that had carried Kalahari colonists to New World centuries ago, were pulled from museums and recommissioned. They were slow, outdated, running on technology that other species had abandoned generations ago. But they would have to do. The Kalahari leadership had debated through the night. Some wanted to fight, to make the galaxy pay for this injustice in blood. Others wanted to negotiate, to find some compromise that would spare their people. But Thavrin, who had lived through 3 centuries and seen the rise and fall of countless political movements, knew the truth. The Zarmethians wanted their worlds, and they had convinced the galaxy to give them legal cover for genocide. Fighting was futile. The Kalahari had scientists and artists, philosophers and engineers. They had patrol boats for asteroid defense and shuttles for intercolony transport. Against the combined military might of the Galactic Enforcement Coalition, they would last perhaps a day. Negotiation was pointless. The vote had been taken. Protocol Omega was in effect. There was no appeal, no higher authority. The Senate's decision was final. That left only one option: run to the one species crazy enough to protect them. We can save 10,000, Thavrin announced to his council. That is the capacity of our transport fleet. 10,000 souls out of 50 million. The silence that followed was suffocating. How do you choose? How do you decide which children live and which die? Which artists will preserve their culture and which will be erased? Which scientists will carry their knowledge forward and which will be silenced forever? In the end, they didn't choose. They opened a lottery. Every Kalahari who wanted to flee could register. The computer would select randomly. Families would be kept together, but beyond that it was pure chance. Democracy in its most brutal form. The transport ships launched 3 days after the vote, carrying 10,000 Kalahari and the weight of an entire species' hopes. Behind them, 40 million remained, preparing for the end. Some chose to go quietly. Others prepared to make the Enforcement Coalition pay for every inch of their worlds. But all of them knew how this story ended. The journey to Earth's borders would take 3 weeks. The ships traveled through neutral space, broadcasting civilian transponders, making no aggressive moves. Behind them, Zarmethian scout ships watched and reported, counting the refugees, confirming they were leaving their worlds as promised. On Earth, the the news of the Senate vote spread like wildfire. Social media platforms that typically argued about sports and entertainment were suddenly flooded with images of Kalahari children, artists, families. The vote was trending worldwide. Protests erupted outside UN headquarters in New York, demanding action. Volunteer organizations formed to help with refugee resettlement. Donations poured in from every continent. But more significantly, something else was happening. In military bases from Beijing to Brasilia, from Moscow to Mumbai, personnel were being recalled from leave. Shipyards that had spent centuries building exploration vessels and cargo haulers were receiving new blueprints. Asteroid mining operations were being given priority requisitions for certain metals. Reserve fleets were being activated. Secretary-General Maria Santos addressed the Earth from UN headquarters, her face projected on screens across the planet. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, but she had led Earth through economic crisis and natural disasters, and her people trusted her. Citizens of Earth, she began, today we face a choice that will define what humanity stands for. The Galactic Senate has voted to exterminate the Kalahari people. 46 species decided that 50 million sentient beings should die, based on fabricated evidence and political convenience. Only Earth stood against this atrocity. She paused, letting the weight of that sink in. 10,000 Kalahari refugees are coming to us, seeking protection. The galaxy expects us to bow to their demands, to surrender these innocents to certain death. They expect us to value our safety over our principles. Her expression hardened. They don't understand humanity. We are the species that looked at our own history, at our own genocides and atrocities, and said, never again. We meant it for ourselves, and we mean it for anyone who seeks our protection. I am therefore invoking Article 7 of Earth's Constitution. When faced with genocide, neutrality is complicity. The implications of Article 7 were clear to anyone who understood human history. It was passed after the formation of the United Earth Government, a codification of the lessons learned from humanity's bloodiest century. It meant that Earth would not stand aside while another species was exterminated, regardless of the cost. The Kalahari transport ships crossed into Earth-claimed space on a Tuesday morning, Greenwich Mean Time. They were met by a fleet of human cruisers, sleek vessels designed for patrol and peacekeeping operations. The contrast was stark. The Kalahari ships were battered, asymmetrical, their hulls scarred by centuries of use. The human ships were modern, clean, symmetrical in the way that human aesthetics demanded. But what mattered was the message those human ships sent. You are safe now. The refugees were brought to orbital stations around Earth and Luna, massive rotating habitats that had been constructed over centuries to house humanity's growing space-based population. Teams of humans waited with supplies, medical equipment, translators, and signs hastily written in Kalahari script. Welcome home. When the first Kalahari children stepped off the transports, many humans watching the broadcasts found themselves crying. These weren't aliens in the threatening sense that old Earth science fiction had imagined. They were families, parents holding children's hands, elderly individuals moving slowly, supported by younger relatives, people carrying bags of belongings, photographs, items of cultural significance. They were refugees in the most fundamental sense, and humanity remembered what it meant to be refugees. Elder Thavrin was among the last to disembark. He moved slowly, his crystalline form dimmer than it had been on Kethsara. The weight of leaving 40 million of his people to die was crushing him, a burden he would carry until his final day. Ambassador Chen met him personally, along with Secretary-General Santos. Elder Thavrin, Sarah said softly, welcome to Earth. Thavrin's voice, translated by the device he wore, carried a depth of sorrow that needed no translation. You should not have done this. You should not risk your people for us. Santos stepped forward. Elder, humanity learned a hard lesson in our past. When good people do nothing, evil triumphs. We're done doing nothing. For 1 week, there was peace. The Kalahari were settled in temporary housing. Human volunteers worked around the clock to help them adjust, teaching them about Earth customs, helping them understand their new home. Kalahari children started to laugh again. Adults began to hope, cautiously, that perhaps they had a future after all. Then the enforcement coalition arrived. High Executor Varnex commanded the fleet from his flagship, the Absolute Justice, a name that dripped with irony. He was a Zarmethian admiral, a veteran of 3 previous Protocol Omega enforcements. In his mind, this was simple. The galaxy had voted. Earth would comply or be destroyed. There was no third option. His fleet numbered 2,000 warships drawn from 24 species. They represented the military might of half the galaxy, enough firepower to crack planets and boil oceans. They had never failed to enforce a Protocol Omega vote. They dropped out of faster-than-light travel at Earth's borders, their weapons systems active, their shields raised. Varnex's message was transmitted on all frequencies, ensuring Earth would hear and understand. This is High Executor Varnex of the Galactic Enforcement Coalition to the human government. You are harboring fugitives from Collective Security Protocol Omega. You have 72 hours to surrender all Kelhari refugees to our custody. Failure to comply will result in humanity being classified as accomplices to galactic terrorism. Protocol Omega will be extended to include Earth and all human settlements. You have 72 hours. Choose wisely. The message was received at UN headquarters at 14:37 GMT on a Friday afternoon. Secretary General Santos read it 3 times, then called an emergency session of Earth Security Council. The debate was brief. Earth had known this moment was coming. They had prepared for it. Ambassador Chen was authorized to deliver humanity's response. She transmitted from Unity Station, where the Galactic Senate was monitoring the situation with a mixture of anticipation and dread. High Executor Varnex, this is Ambassador Sarah Chen speaking on behalf of Earth and all human settlements. The Kelhari refugees you refer to are now citizens of Earth, granted full legal protection under our laws. We do not recognize Collective Security Protocol Omega as legitimate in this case, as it was based on fabricated evidence and represents genocide for political gain. We will not surrender our citizens to illegal execution. If you wish to take them, you will have to come through us. On the bridge of absolute justice, Varnex's scales flushed with what humans would have recognized as contempt. Ambassador Chen, do you understand the situation? We have 2,000 warships. Our intelligence indicates Earth has fewer than 200 capital ships. This is not a negotiation you can win. Sarah's response was calm, almost gentle. High Executor, do you understand humanity? We're not trying to win a negotiation. We're drawing a line. And when humans draw a line, we don't move it because someone threatens us. You have 72 hours to withdraw. After that, we'll consider your presence in our space an act of war. Varnex actually laughed, the sound coming through the translation as a deep, rumbling growl. 72 hours then. Use them to say goodbye to your loved ones, Ambassador. You've chosen extinction for your entire species to protect 10,000 aliens you barely know. History will remember humanity as the most foolish species that ever evolved. Sarah closed the channel without responding. She had said everything that needed to be said. Earth used those 72 hours strategically. Non-combatants were evacuated from border stations. The small human defense fleet, 237 capital ships, positioned themselves at strategic choke points. Supply lines were secured, medical facilities prepared for casualties. But most importantly, a message was broadcast on all human frequencies, military and civilian, from Earth to the farthest human colony. Olympus Protocol, all VSSCLS, the line. The phrase meant nothing to the enforcement coalition. Their intelligence officers searched human databases, finding only vague references to ancient military contingencies, peacetime protocols for planetary defense. Nothing that would matter in the coming battle. They didn't understand. They couldn't understand, because Olympus Protocol wasn't a military strategy. It was a promise humanity had made to itself 3 centuries ago, after the last war that had nearly destroyed Earth. If humanity ever needed to stand united, every ship, every person, every resource would answer the call. On the Kelhari settlement stations, Elder Thavrin watched the news broadcasts with growing horror. He met with Secretary General Santos in person, his crystalline form practically vibrating with distress. You cannot do this, he pleaded. I cannot allow you to sacrifice your entire species for 10,000 of my people. We will surrender ourselves. The Zarmethians can have us. Your people will be safe. Santos looked at the old Kelhari with genuine compassion. Elder Thavrin, let me tell you something about humanity. We're pack animals. We evolved in small tribes on a dangerous world, and we survived because we protected each other. When one member of the pack is threatened, all members respond. It's not rational. It's not strategic. It's just who we are. She gestured toward a window that showed Earth below, blue and white and beautiful. 300 years ago, we nearly destroyed ourselves. Humans killing humans over resources, ideology, territory. We decided that never again would we allow that kind of hatred to define us. We built a unified Earth based on one principle. Sentient life has value, regardless of where it evolved or what it looks like. Thavrin's voice was barely a whisper. But you barely know us, Santos smiled sadly. We don't need to know you to know that genocide is wrong, your people. You have children who laugh, artists who create, elders who carry wisdom. That's enough. You're not refugees anymore, Elder Thavrin, your family, and humans protect family. The 72 hours expired on a Monday morning. High Executor Varnex gave the order, and the Enforcement Coalition fleet began moving forward, a wall of military might advancing toward Earth's inner system. They expected to sweep aside Earth's small defense fleet within hours. They expected humanity to realize their mistake and surrender. They expected another quick, clean enforcement of Protocol Omega. They were wrong about everything. The first sign that something was different came when every sensor in the Coalition fleet simultaneously went haywire. Space itself seemed to shimmer, reality bending in ways that shouldn't be possible. Varnex's sensor officer reported gravimetric anomalies, energy signatures appearing from nowhere, faster than light wake patterns suggesting massive fleet movements. Then they appeared, ships, thousands of ships, tens of thousands of ships. From every corner of human space they came. Ancient colony ships from Mars, their hulls scarred from centuries of asteroid mining operations, now bristling with mass drivers and missile batteries. Generation ships that had carried human colonists to distant stars over decades-long journeys, their enormous hulls retrofitted with weapons platforms. Luxury cruise liners converted into carrier craft, launching swarms of fighters. Trading vessels with cargo holds full of munitions. Science ships with experimental weapons. Museum pieces from Earth's early space age, ships that should have been decommissioned centuries ago, somehow made flight worthy again. But what struck fear into the Coalition's collective hearts wasn't the number of ships. It was the names. Every vessel bore a name that told humanity's story. Remember New Terra, after a colony lost to a natural disaster. Never again, in dozens of languages. Unity Station, the protectors, humanity's promise. For those who cannot fight, stand together, one species, one purpose. And leading them all, an ancient dreadnought pulled from mothballs, restored and upgraded, bearing the simplest and most powerful name of all, the Line. On the bridge of that flagship, Admiral James Okonkwo stood tall. He was 73 years old, a veteran of humanity's last major military engagement nearly 5 decades ago. He had been retired, teaching military history at the Academy on Luna. But when the Olympus Protocol activated, he had answered. Along with thousands of other retired officers, enlisted personnel and civilians who simply refused to stand aside. His fleet numbered 43,000 vessels. Not all were warships. Many were converted civilian craft, improvised weapons platforms, ships that had no business in a military engagement. But they were crewed by 8 billion humans who had answered the call. Volunteers from every human world. Merchant captains who had never fired a weapon in anger. Colonists from frontier worlds. Station operators, miners, scientists, teachers, artists. Every single one had looked at the Kelhari children on the news broadcasts and said, "Not on my watch." Admiral Okonkwo opened a channel to the entire Enforcement Coalition fleet. His voice was calm, measured, carrying the weight of humanity's conviction. High Executor Varnex, this is Admiral James Okonkwo of the Terran Defense Fleet. You came here expecting to face Earth's military, 200 ships, a manageable threat. You thought we would realize we couldn't win and surrender. You were wrong. He paused, letting them take in the scope of what they faced. What you're facing now is not Earth's military. It's Earth, all of Earth. Every human who could crew a ship, mount a weapon, or volunteer to stand in your way. You threatened our citizens. 10,000 Kalahari are now our people. To reach them, you will have to destroy every ship in this fleet. You will have to kill millions of humans who volunteered to stand between you and them. The tactical displays on absolute justice were painting an impossible picture. Even with the coalition's technological advantages, even with their superior weapons and shields, the sheer numbers were overwhelming. Varnex's tactical officers were running simulations, and every model showed the same result. The coalition would win, eventually, but they would lose 60 to 70% of their fleet in the process. And then what? Fight through Earth's planetary defenses. Invade a world of 8 billion humans. Face the rage of a species that had just watched millions of their volunteers die. Admiral Okonkwo wasn't finished. Let me tell you something about humanity, High Executor. We spent thousands of years fighting each other. Wars over territory, resources, ideology, religion. We nearly destroyed ourselves a dozen times over, but we learned. We learned that division makes us weak and unity makes us unstoppable. His voice hardened. You're looking at the result of that unity. 43,000 ships, millions of volunteers, and behind them 8 billion more humans on Earth and our colonies ready to continue the fight if we fall. This isn't Earth's military, Varnex. This is Earth's promise. We said never again. We meant it, not for us and not for anyone who seeks our protection. He leaned forward, his image transmitted to every coalition ship. So ask yourself, is this genocide worth it? Is stealing the Kalahari's worlds worth starting a war with a species that doesn't fight for territory or resources but for principles? We don't want your worlds. We don't want to conquer you. We just want you to leave our citizens alone. But if you force this fight, we will give you one you'll never forget. Your choice, High Executor, you have 1 hour. The channel closed. The two fleets faced each other across the darkness of space, thousands of ships on each side, weapons charged, shields raised, waiting. On absolute justice, High Executor Varnex faced a choice no executor had faced before. Protocol Omega enforcements were supposed to be simple. The condemned species was isolated, outnumbered, and quickly eliminated. There were never consequences, never resistance like this. His tactical officers were unanimous. Attacking would result in massive coalition casualties. Species that had contributed ships to the fleet were already sending private messages, questioning whether this was worth the cost. Some were threatening to withdraw entirely. The Zarmethian Collective had promised this would be easy. They had assured the coalition that humanity would back down, that the refugees would be surrendered, that Protocol Omega would be enforced like all the others. But the Zarmethians weren't here. Their ships were, but the Collective's leadership was safely back in their own territory, leaving Varnex to face the consequences of their political maneuvering. He thought about his own crew, his own people. If he ordered the attack, thousands of them would die. For what? To enforce a protocol against a species most coalition members didn't actually believe was a threat. To seize worlds for the Zarmethians' economic benefit. The hour passed slowly. On both sides, crews prepared for battle, checked weapons systems, said silent prayers, or performed whatever rituals their species practiced before potentially dying. Then, precisely 60 minutes after Admiral Okonkwo's ultimatum, High Executor Varnex made his decision. All coalition vessels, this is High Executor Varnex. We are withdrawing from Earth space. Stand down from combat readiness and prepare for FTL transit. On the line, Admiral Okonkwo felt decades of tension leave his shoulders. They had done it. The bluff, if you could call 43,000 ships and millions of volunteers a bluff, had worked. But Varnex wasn't finished. His final message was broadcast to Earth and to the entire galaxy. Let it be known that the Enforcement Coalition has withdrawn from Earth space at this time. However, Protocol Omega remains in effect. The Galactic Senate's vote stands. Humanity is harboring fugitives from galactic justice. This matter is not resolved. It was a face-saving measure, a way to retreat without admitting defeat. But everyone knew what had actually happened. Humanity had stood in the way, and the galaxy had blinked. As the coalition fleet departed, jumping to FTL in groups, Admiral Okonkwo broadcast to the human fleet. All vessels, this is Admiral Okonkwo, stand down from combat alert. Maintain defensive positions, and thank you, every single one of you. You just showed the galaxy what humanity stands for. 43,000 ships, from massive dreadnoughts to converted mining vessels, responded with a simple acknowledgement. They would remain on station just in case. But for now, the crisis had passed. On Earth, celebrations erupted, but they were muted, tempered by the knowledge that this wasn't over. The Zarmethians wouldn't accept this humiliation. The Galactic Senate wouldn't let humanity's defiance stand unchallenged. But for now, 10,000 Kelhari were safe. In the weeks that followed, humanity made good on their promise. The Kelhari refugees were granted full citizenship. They were settled on New Haven, a colony world with environmental conditions similar to their lost homeworld. Humans helped them build homes, establish communities, begin the painful process of rebuilding their culture with only 10,000 survivors. Kelhari scientists began collaborating with human researchers. Kelhari artists created works that blended their aesthetic with humanity's. Kelhari children attended schools alongside human children, learning each other's languages, playing together in parks that hadn't existed a month before. Elder Thavrin watched it all with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. Gratitude for humanity's compassion, sorrow for the 40 million Kelhari who would never see this new beginning. The galaxy watched too, and what they saw shook the foundations of galactic politics. The smaller species, those who had lived in fear of the powerful few, began asking questions. How many other species had been exterminated under Protocol Omega? How many had been victims of political maneuvering rather than genuine threats? An independent coalition of species demanded access to the Zarmethian evidence against the Kelhari. When it was finally released, the fabrication was obvious. The communications had been altered. The testimony had been bought. The technological developments had been deliberately misrepresented. The Kelhari had never been a threat. They had simply been in the way of Zarmethian economic interests. The scandal shook the Galactic Senate. The Zarmethian Collective was censured, losing their permanent seat on the Security Council. Other species that had supported Protocol Omega faced political consequences at home. The vote became a symbol of everything wrong with the galactic order. Powerful species manipulating law to serve their interests while hiding behind the language of collective security. But more importantly, humanity's stand became legendary. A species that had stood alone against 46 others. A species that had mobilized 43,000 ships to protect 10,000 refugees they barely knew. A species that had meant it when they said, "Never again." Admiral Okonkwo was invited to address the Galactic Senate. He stood where Ambassador Chen had stood months before, but the chamber was different now. The confident arrogance was gone, replaced by uncertainty and, in some cases, fear. "Honorable members of the Senate," he began. "I'm not a diplomat, I'm a soldier, so I'm going to speak plainly. What happened at Earth wasn't about military might. It wasn't about humanity trying to dominate the galaxy or enforce our will on others. It was about drawing a line." He paused, making sure every translator was keeping up. "Humanity learned hard lessons in our history. We learned what happens when good people do nothing while evil acts in plain sight. We learned that power without accountability leads to atrocity. We learned that justice delayed is justice denied. And we learned that sometimes the only way to stop evil is to stand in its way and refuse to move." His voice hardened. The Kelhari were condemned to extinction based on lies. Lies that this Senate accepted without proper investigation because it was politically convenient. 50 million sentient beings would have died, and the galaxy would have moved on without a second thought. That's not justice. That's not security. That's murder dressed up in bureaucratic language. Some representatives shifted uncomfortably. Others met his gaze steadily. "Humanity doesn't want to rule the galaxy," Okonkwo continued. "We don't want to impose our values on other species. We don't want to be galactic police. But we won't stand aside while genocide happens in front of us. We can't. It's not in our nature. We're pack animals, and when one of the pack is threatened, we all respond. He gestured toward the chamber's entrance, where Elder Thavrin waited. 10,000 Kelhari are now human citizens. They're building lives, raising children, contributing to our civilization. They're not refugees anymore. They're family, and if you want to harm them, you'll have to go through every single human in existence. The ultimatum hung in the air like a physical thing. But Okonkwo's voice softened slightly. We're not here to make enemies. We're here to request one simple change to galactic law. Any extinction-level Protocol Omega vote must be unanimous. Any single species can offer asylum without penalty. That's it. That's all we ask. Make genocide harder. Make protection easier. Make the galaxy live up to the ideals this Senate claims to represent. The proposal was debated for weeks. Some species opposed it, arguing it would make the galaxy less secure. Others supported it, seeing an opportunity to restrain the powerful few who had dominated galactic politics for too long. In the end, it passed. Not unanimously, but by a large enough margin that it became galactic law. Protocol Omega would now require unanimous consent. Any species could offer asylum. The rules had changed, and humanity had changed them. 6 months after the refugees arrived, Elder Thavrin stood with Ambassador Chen in a park on New Haven. Kelhari and human children played together, their laughter universal regardless of species. In the distance, construction crews, mixed human and Kelhari, were building permanent settlements. "You risked everything for us," Thavrin said, his crystalline form catching the sunlight in patterns that humans had learned meant contentment. "Your entire species, your homeworld, your future, for 10,000 people you didn't know." Chen smiled, watching a human child help a Kelhari child climb a tree. "Elder humanity spent a long time figuring out who we want to be. We decided we want to be the species that helps, the species that protects, the species that draws lines and holds them not for profit or power but because it's right." She turned to face him directly. "You're not refugees anymore. You're not charity cases or political statements. You're people, your neighbors, your colleagues and friends, and for some of our people you're becoming family. That's what humanity does. We expand the definition of us until it includes everyone who wants to be part of it." Above them, visible in the daytime sky, the line remained on station. The flagship of humanity's volunteer fleet hadn't returned to mothballs. It orbited New Haven now, a permanent reminder to the galaxy of humanity's promise. Other ships from the volunteer fleet had dispersed, returning to their normal functions. The merchant vessels went back to trading. The mining ships went back to asteroids. The colony ships went back to exploration. But they all kept their weapons. They all maintained the communication networks that had allowed 43,000 ships to assemble in days. They all remembered what they had stood for, and they all knew they would answer the call again if needed. Because that was humanity's promise. Not to conquer, not to dominate, not to impose their will on the galaxy, but to stand between the innocent and those who would harm them. To be the line. The galaxy had learned a hard truth that day when the Enforcement Coalition retreated. Humanity doesn't make idle threats. When they draw a line, they mean it. When they say never again, they enforce it. When they accept refugees, they make them family. And that line, that promise, that unwavering commitment to protecting the vulnerable was backed by something empires couldn't match. 8 billion humans who would drop everything, volunteer for danger, and stand together because they believe that sentient life has value. All sentient life. Even species they just met. Even when it cost them everything. That was humanity. That was Earth. That was the line. And the line does not move.